This video is brought to you by Squarespace. In coffee, we talk a lot about the importance of accuracy, and a lot of our variables are directly attached to measuring things like doses, yields, brew ratios, and the like. So surprisingly, there's been one piece of coffee gear that I've never reviewed or went really deep into talking about, and that's scales. Now, I think the reasoning for that is threefold. For one, at least partially, I just don't really have the type of insight on a scale as I do on an espresso machine. For example, I can't crack it open, look at the parts, tell you what they do, and if they're of good build quality. But also, let's also be real, scales are just not a very sexy or fun video topic. And last but not least, even though these are considered smart scales, I still use them in the stupidest way possible. If I had to put a percentage on this, I would say 90% of the time it works every time.
That doesn't make sense.
All right, I'm just making sure you're paying attention. Like I said, this isn't a sexy video topic, but 90% of the time I use a scale as just that, a scale, measuring only weight. The other 10% of the time, I'll double it as a timer. But other than that, that's pretty much it. And also, I don't think I'm the only one in this boat, but we'll talk a bit more about that later. But a few months ago, people began noticing I started using the new Varia AKU, and I started asking my thoughts on it, especially up against the Acaia Lunar, which has been my long-time daily scale. And when I say long time, I mean I've been using this since I got my Linea Mini, and that was back in 2017. Now, it should be said that I didn't get the AKU to replace the Lunar. Instead, Varia offered to send me one no strings, so I thought, why not? And like I said earlier, I never planned on making a full video about it or scales in general, but here we are, so let's make the most of it, shall we? When looking at these two scales side by side, they aren't all that different. Of course, there's some slight variances in size and shape, but the overall look, materials, and feel are very similar. Even the programmed smart functions of all these scales have become pretty much standard. Both have auto timer and tare modes, which simply starts the built-in timer when the flow is detected, or tears out the weight of your cup or vessel automatically once it's sat on the scale. Also, newer models of the Lunar have a couple additional features, one of which measures flow rate, and they also have a new setting that starts a timer after a cup is placed on the scale. And this is aimed at helping those who prefer to measure their shot from pump on instead of at first drop, which is how I prefer and how I believe is the most accurate way to measure a shot of espresso, because once water is hitting the coffee, extraction has begun, but this is a whole other conversation, so let's just move on. But like I said earlier, I don't really use any of the smart settings on these scales, and mainly just use it manually as a scale or a timer. But I was also curious to know how many people actually fall into that same boat. So I did a poll on Instagram, and it turns out the majority of folks are with me at roughly a 70-30 split. So with that information in mind, I think the main points of consideration when choosing between these two scales is just the classic price versus performance conundrum. Now, with a roughly $150 price difference, the Acaia Lunar does have a bit of an uphill battle against the Varia AKU, especially if you're just looking for a basic scale with some timing and auto options. But the Lunar does carry through some additional benefits, like they do get regular updates from Acaia, and they have a 2-year warranty against Varia's 1. But also they have an app that allows you to connect via Bluetooth with handy remote features and brew ratio converters. But let's also look at some of the basic numbers. For instance, Varia's weighing range is from 0.3 to 3,100 grams, and the Lunar's is from 0.1 to 2,000. Now, I think to me and probably your average barista, these numbers don't really mean a whole lot. It's rare that I pull a shot of espresso over 70 grams or do a pour over 500. So when it comes to the weighing range, that isn't really a definitive or deciding factor when choosing between these two scales. When it comes to battery life though, the Lunar is a clear winner, but that also sort of depends on how you use it. Varia uses 300 brewing cycles as their battery life description, so let's just assume 40 seconds is your average brew cycle. So 40 times 300 is 12,000, 12,000 seconds equals about 3 hours. And when you compare that to the Lunar at 27 hours, that's a pretty significant difference. But when it comes to a home barista's workflow, I personally tend to charge my scales maybe once a month, as I leave them on for short bursts throughout the day, so battery life also feels like a bit of a moot point. So in the end, of course, anyone could go through each of these scale spec sheets with a fine-tooth comb, compare the raw numbers, and decide which one is better based on that. But what it really comes down to, and why people come to me and ask me questions about these things, is they want to know what my opinion is, and they want to know how these compare in my mind. Generally, the AKU and the Lunar work and perform almost identically when it comes to usability and workflow. But having both on hand, I do find myself reaching for the AKU more often for a few reasons. For one, the LED on the Varia is brighter and crisper. Now the screen on my Lunar may just be getting old, but I find the AKU easier to read and follow at a glance when also concentrating on other brewing parameters. Also, the AKU has small rubber feet that won't scratch or scuff a polished or painted drain tray, unlike the flat metal base on the Lunar. Now I think this one can sort of go either way, depending on who you are and what you value in your scale. But the Lunar is more sensitive. That means it's faster and more responsive to input, but also at this point we're talking about fractions of a second. But this sensitivity also means it's more responsive to everything. Any movement around it or near it can throw it off. So from here, let's circle back to the price difference. Of course, I can't deny that the Lunar is definitely an expensive piece, but it's lasted nearly 7 years now, so I'd say at $250, I've gotten my money's worth. But the Varia, at just under $100, can do most of the things the Lunar does, and does them just as well, but its long-term reliability is yet to be seen. So in the end, my advice on this, or choosing between these two scales, is very simple and maybe a little unsatisfying depending on how long this video ends up being, but I think you should choose the one that best fits your needs and your budget, because their capabilities, performance, and aesthetics are more or less the same. Admittedly, the things that make me reach for the AKU over the Lunar are minor, and based on my personal preferences, and not on the scale's performance. And I think that's really the reason why I resisted doing reviews on scales for so long, and why it'll probably be another 5 years before I do another. And on that massive bombshell, I think it's time I wrap this one up, and as usual, pass the conversation on to you. What do you think about smart scales? And if you're a smart scale user, do you actually use the program settings, or do you keep it simple like I do? And also, if you want to build a simple and beautiful website, you should definitely check out Squarespace. Using their Fluid engine, you can design your own website with just a simple drag and drop. You can also utilize built-in email campaigns to automate marketing, send a quick thank you note, or even a special discount to help build direct customer relationships. Or you can even go one step further and offer gated members-only areas with exclusive access to sections of your website. So head on over to squarespace.com for your free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Sprometheus for 10% off your first purchase of a domain or website. And a big thank you to this month's Patreon supporters: Stephen, Claire, Sam, Bound Coffee, Spookus, Noel, Cheryl, Thomas, Sean, Horace and Roe, John, Josh, Corey, Tim, Jason, Jeffrey, Jeff, Mike, Brandon, Tyler, JRC, Absolute, Stephen, Marco, Lord Bumbly, Arthur, Techcom Advisors, Happy Camper, Devo, Ben, Monster04, Bruce, Kyle, Lilac, NK, Brooks, Henry, Sam, Nano Roastery, Pat Suin, Jr., Sergey, Matthew, Miroslav, Melkonig, Schlack, Shrey, Stephen, Andrew S., Pedro, Rami, Alex, Coffee Bros, Tom, Lars, Hugh, Gergen, Pax Coffee, Andrew P, and Asaf, and a big thank you to the barista and barback tiers. If you want any information on my Patreon, there's a link in the description and the upper right-hand corner right now. And last but not least, thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Hit that little bell button for notifications of new videos posted every Friday. Check out my Instagram at Sprometheus for content throughout the week, my blog at Sprometheus.com, and as always, stay caffeinated. Pony Boy.